Robert Angus Williams, shareholder of Lewis, Longman and Walker, PA, joins us in studio to discuss general permitting issues with wetlands and the Right to Farm Act. We hope you enjoy.
In Our Expert Opinion podcast is brought to you by SVN Saunders Ralston Dancer Real Estate, a full-service land and commercial brokerage with almost $4 billion in transactions since 1996.
Okay, we are back. Gonna learn a lot today, I have a feeling, mostly because I know almost nothing about your area of expertise, but I've got my co-host Chad Mills in the room with me, who will hopefully jump in and help me whenever I feel like I don't know what I'm talking about, which is most of the time.
So I've got a saying that I love to say that I'm blissful because ignorance is bliss, and I am blissful.
So that's not about Outlook at all.
No,
it's not about Outlook. No.
Somebody asks you how you doing today. Oh, blissful. Just as ignorant as it gets.
See, honestly, I always say I'm better than I deserve.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I know what I did. I'm doing better than what I should be getting.
I know what I did to not get here.
Just telling you.
That's hilarious. And then I have the person who's going to teach us all of these things with here, Robert Angus Williams with Lewis, Longman and Walker.
And Walker.
Yes.
Lewis, Longman and Walker, yes.
A law firm that has a couple of locations. Where are you guys located?
So we're actually located in Jacksonville and West Palm Beach, Tallahassee, and St. Petersburg. And one of our lobbyists has an office in Tampa. And that's kind of our spread across the state. So kind of four corners.
Okay. And you currently live in Tallahassee.
That's right.
So thanks for driving all this way. But I found out right before we started recording that you are a true Lakeland native.
Yes.
Yes. I mean, did your family?
So, yes, my mother's family, they settled in Lakeland in 1865 and right over on Lake Wire, where the police station is now, was their cabin.
Oh my gosh, you're kidding.
Yeah, so everything around the Civic Center, whatever they call it now, but it was the Lakeland Civic Center.
Vending,
right? That was part of their farm, basically, part of their homestead. They came in, and then a couple weeks after they finished up getting here, they started looking for other people, literally. So,
I don't even know what that would be like. That's very brave and terrifying.
Yeah.
But now, you come back to Lakeland and it's totally different.
Grew up here though, so it's way different when I grew up.
Yeah.
I can tell you that.
Yeah. I feel like it would have been very fun to settle somewhere, but anything. Not that a lot of that's going on anymore. So anyways, so now your firm deals a lot with wetlands, different governmental agencies, and I have to be honest, when I was in law school, anything to do with government, I did not book that class.
Okay.
I was really not up to speed, and I could not understand it. And I want to say that one of my bar questions was on government.
Okay.
Could be totally wrong. It could have been about family law for all that I know. I don't really remember. But I remember thinking, oh, this is what I was not great at. So hopefully you'll teach us some stuff today.
Well, we'll see.
Yeah.
We'll try. Yeah.
Or I guess you could say learn us some stuff.
I can learn you some
like
stuff.
A true
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
Make us less blissful.
That's my job.
Chad will zone out, so he'll still remain in his bliss.
Click my buttons.
Okay, so you and I had talked on the phone about wetlands, and most of the brokers here, we have to know where the wetlands are whenever we're, selling or buying properties. But other than that, ignorance.
Yeah, there's a ton of things. So our firm focuses in a great respect. We do some other things, but we focus a lot on land, water, and government. So if you've got land and it's got some water, some of it's wet, and the government's trying to get involved, that's what we do. That's really where we go. And
Why
so-
would the government be getting involved in that?
Well, if you have a wetland on your property before you can do anything. Well, in fact, let's back up a little bit. Before you do almost anything with your property at all, you're going to need a permit from somebody. Typically, that's going to be an environmental resource permit. Is almost a mainstay, almost a guarantee that you're going to need that permit. Even if you don't, quote, need to get some big application, there's probably a statewide permit that you just have to give notice that you've done something and it's already allowed. But you've got a permit to do most everything. And you know, lawyers, absolutes are really dangerous. So it's, you know, pretty good fair bet that you're going to need what we call an ERP, environmental resource permit. And that'll either be issued by one of the water management districts across the state, or it can, some instances, be issued actually by the Department of Environmental Protection, the Florida Department of Environmental Protection. So that's the statewide side of things. So.
And why do they care? Are they trying to preserve, conserve? You know, why are their hands in this?
So their hands are in this, they, in this instance, being the state, but you can also lump in the federal government as well. A lot of this, Florida's unique in so many respects. So recently I happened to have the opportunity to travel abroad a little bit, and I would meet somebody, and they go, "Where are you from?" So I'm from Florida. And I would tell them, and all the stories you hear about the Florida man are true.
It's true.
All of them are true, every one of them.
Yeah.
So don't discount that.
Yeah.
But aside from that, Florida is an interesting place from the standpoint of the topography and a number of wetlands that we have, and it being a subtropical climate as well, in the number of species that exist in the state. So there's a lot of endangered species. There's a lot of habitat that needs to be protected. Well, let me put it this way. There's a lot of habitat that we as a state have determined should be protected, okay? And it's all about those overarching policy decisions. And so the other piece of the wetland and why does the state care and why does the federal government care is the primary source of our drinking water comes from groundwater, and it comes down through the wetlands to get there. And so it becomes, if you want water and you want clean water, you're going to want some wetlands. I mean, that's just kind of the way the science kind of breaks out. So in overarching general terms, that's really the public policy. It's all about the water, really.
So then you and your firm, you come in, and what is your role in this?
So sometimes we ask ourselves that.
Yeah.
Right? Frequently we represent either landowners or purchasers or developers, or sometimes we represent counties as well, doing different projects that they need to do. Something needs to occur, or has determined that this is how we're going to use this piece of property. And on that piece of property, whatever those physical attributes are, the number of wetlands, whether they're any endangered species or listed species is what I should really say, are on the property, kind of what goes on. So what we do, and do the very best that we always can, is to assist the client in achieving their goals, whatever it may be. If they want to build something, we try to figure out how we get them permitted to build what they want to build. Now, they might not be able to sometimes build exactly kind of how they wanted to, but those are our goals. That's what we take on when we take on a client. And so that's where our focus really is. And so where we come in is helping them navigate through the myriad state and federal regulations and state and federal laws and sometimes local regulations on how they can utilize their property the way they see fit. And you know, that's really where we come involved. And we're part of a team typically with some consultants and some other folks, the scientists and those type folks that are invaluable in getting that done. So.
I might not know a lot about governmental law, but I do know that working with the government can be very trying, nuanced, and so I think it's wonderful that there are people like you who are able to kind of hold somebody's hand and walk them through it and really get the desired results, you know, from the developer or the buyer's perspective. And, you know, I think I don't know how people would know the first step in getting done what they need to get done.
Experts.
Yes.
Yeah, no, that's exactly right, Chad. You're right. It's the experts, and that's where we really work hard to maintain relationships with the very best folks and the very best consultants, biologists. You know, sometimes they're appraisers, but typically biologists and planners, and to really understand what's going on, because it does seem daunting.
Yes.
So if you look at a website for the Florida Department of Environmental Protection, you get who you're supposed to call, right? I mean, that's really some of the initial questions. So before I came to Lewis, Longman Walker, I was the general counsel at the Department of Environmental Protection.
Oh, okay.
At FDEP.
Okay.
And the guy that's 2 doors down in our office, Fred Ashour, he was a general counsel at the Florida Department of Environmental Protection before me.
Okay.
And so a number of the folks in our firm have been general counsels or otherwise worked in either the Florida Department of Environmental Protection or the different water management districts. And so I can promise you one thing for sure. The folks that we work with all the time, and we maintain those relationships, it's out of mutual respect.
Yeah.
They will not change something for us. They will not bend a rule for us. They will not break a law for us. None of that will ever happen. But we try to understand how the pressures, where the policy pressures are coming from. Because their clients have a goal as well. The Department of Environmental Protection, their goal is to implement the policy of the state as determined by the Florida legislature and signed off on by the governor. That's their policy goal. And so understanding where they are headed, as well as understanding where my client is headed, is critical to find where those two things intersect and come into harmony. And that's essentially what we really try to do.
Well, no, and I think it is comforting for your clients to know that you do know the trails and paths and, what any of the governmental agencies are up against or how they're functioning. It's not that they're, giving you any special treatment. It's just that it's nice to know that you have somebody who has experience in that and is able to kind of get into their minds.
Yeah, well, yeah, I guess.
If you can.
Right. But I will tell you candidly, the folks that are working on from the governmental side of things, what I have found truly while I was working there and before and now, is that they're genuinely very good folks.
Yeah.
And they're very talented people.
Yeah.
And they care about what they're doing day in, day out. And that's a good thing for all of us.
Yeah.
You know?
Well, it's a good thing for Florida,
Yeah.
to kind of keep us to at least have water to drink and,
That's right.
cook with and whatever else. Now, whenever it comes down to, I guess you would call it due diligence on wetlands. And I do remember this word in maybe it was property class, I don't remember, watershed.
Yeah.
And I believe that's how the water moves across the land.
Typically.
Okay.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
so, I think that, and I hear property owners often being like, well, they don't want their properties to flood. So if there is a property that has been holding water, or I guess, whatever you want to call it,
Yeah.
they don't want that to come over onto their property. And so are you working with things like this or, okay.
Yeah, frequently. In fact, those are a couple of different concepts all mixed up in there, which is not a problem. Because really and truly, these concepts and these items are mixed up.
Yes.
It's all in one, you got this one basket of stuff. And what does it do? And so flooding is a good example. So there are floodplains that have been identified across the state, and I think across the nation, but certainly across the state, where the 500-year floodplain, the 100-year floodplain, the 25-year floodplain. And so before you can encroach into, let's say, I think it's a 100-year flood, you have to compensate for the encroachment. And the encroachment is actually filling. So it's just like what you indicated. I've got a property A and property B are in the same floodplain. If property A, and let's say they're in the same 100-year floodplain, property A fills their property a little bit, where's that water going? It's going to property B.
Okay.
Right? And so in order to, you have to compensate
Right.
for that fill. That's irrespective of whether it's a wetland, that's irrespective of anything else. That's one tiny snippet. And sometimes that can be an interesting puzzle to solve, an interesting fight to have. And so that's floodplain compensation. The other items are generally, this is again general speaking, in Florida, under the common law, you have to accept all of the water that comes on you. So naturally. So I'm living on property A and water from property B. Let's flip that around. No, it doesn't matter. So my property, if I'm downhill from somebody, I've got to accept that water because naturally I'm accepting it. That's the way the good Lord put it together.
Okay.
Okay. If I can't then put up a ditch or a berm or something to reject that water.
Okay.
Then I flood upstream if
Okay.
I do that. So I can't do that, right? I can try to reroute and I can do other things. And again, the upstream property owner can't do things to make my situation worse. And so that is a big piece of the puzzle.
Yeah.
And when we talked earlier about why do they care, the water management districts care because of that precise thing. It's the water management district. It's really a lot about stormwater. And what are we going to do with this stormwater? And how do we reroute this so we don't harm our neighbors?
Yeah.
And then at that same time, in fact, there's a massive rewrite of the stormwater rules across the state that are undergoing right now. Be fun when that starts getting implemented.
Yeah.
Will not make things easier in some ways. I think significantly a bunch of ways. But it's about treating that water also. So imagine you build a Publix where shopping is a pleasure. You started here in Lakeland, one of my favorite places. The only place I shop for groceries, quite frankly. And so they build a Publix and they have a parking lot and they have these stormwater ponds all around it. And you'll have seen them, Some are wet ponds, some are dry ponds. So they only fill up when it's raining,
Yeah.
And that system is designed to take that runoff from the parking lot primarily, but the building also, and then treat it so that when it goes off the property, you've treated it for nutrients, for oils and grease and a whole bunch of other things. And there's interesting structures they have in there that are pretty passive in that they don't require a lot, active maintenance and those kinds of things. And so it'll pre-treat that water.
Okay.
So in the Southwest Florida Water Management District, you have you treat to the 25-year flood. You have to compensate for the 25-year flood. I think it's 25. I don't think they've changed it.
What is that?
So, right. Well, that's a good question. That's a good question.
What is that?
The 25-year flood is it's a flood that should be occurring about one every 25 years. Now, it occurs more often than that, and then you'll hear a 100-year flood.
Yeah.
And that is a rainfall event that occurs typically once in 100 years.
Okay.
And it's very confusing because it's not the 1% chance and it's not a 25% chance. It's just basically when you average out over eons, that's what it kind of is a thumbnail supposed to be. It doesn't work out exactly that way, but it's a designation on how much a rainfall event is. So my recollection is, and again, I'm not going to swear to this, but let's take like a 2-inch rainfall. 2 inches is a lot of water coming down. That's probably pretty consistent with a 25-year flood.
Okay.
Okay. So that can happen in your yard on a big, good thunderstorm, but it won't happen everywhere.
Okay.
Right?
Okay.
So a 100-year flood is when you've got a hurricane or a tropical storm that just stops and it just floods.
Okay.
And so that's when so we're talking about rainfall events.
Okay.
And
Okay.
so what are these stormwater systems designed to? That's all handled in the environmental resource permitting.
Okay.
And that's another reason your initial question, why do they care?
Yeah.
So because when the water hits the ground, let's treat it, make sure we pull out the nutrients that we want to keep out of the waterways, lakes, streams, rivers, all that kind of stuff. And let's also make sure that we ameliorate any kind of downstream flooding or damage that can occur. So you hold it let it off slowly. It's not doesn't cause a problem.
Okay.
That's theory, kind of how that works.
Yeah. In a perfect world, right?
Yeah. I mean, you're stretching me on that. I mean, I know about that stuff, but I'm no engineer. Okay?
Now, when you say stormwater, you don't mean, do you mean wastewater?
No.
or, okay,
No,
two
no.
separate things.
Wastewater is a completely
Okay,
different.
okay.
We handle a lot of
Yeah.
that kind of stuff as well.
Yeah.
You know.
Kind of what I want to know is, what is a typical client? They're a property owner and they're up against something, or they come to you, same as like a realtor. They come and say, hey, I want this property and I want to make sure that everything is going to check out on it. Or, do they already own it before they come to you? Where are they coming to you? What are their main questions? And, how do you walk them through it?
Yeah, and so it's actually a mixed bag of both.
Okay.
Actually, I would candidly tell you that very mixed bag. Actually, sometimes a client has a goal of building something. Okay, whatever that something is, and in that something they realize, and they have very good counsel already, and there's nothing against those folks whatsoever in a local government area or something, in an area, and then all of a sudden they get a comment from one of these state agencies or a federal agency, and they say, what are you going to do about this listed species, this endangered species here? And everybody at the table, for the landowner or the potential purchaser, they all look at each other and go, what? What are they talking about here? And that's kind of where we get introduced sometimes into that situation. Not that we have all the answers, or any of those kinds of things, but to talk about Imperial Polk County, it's not going to be our first rodeo.
Yeah.
And so we'll get in and try to, and we'll help them figure that situation out. So that's the one scenario. The other scenario, and we've had former clients that will buy a new piece of property or are buying a new piece of property, and they'll call us and go, hey, this thing's covered up with wetlands, and it's got this prior permitting history, and it's got all this stuff on it, and we got panthers running around on it all over the place. Can you get in here? And we get in and help them, a lot of times very specifically with those things that we do.
Yeah.
And so we've become part of the team. Sometimes we're running, sometimes we're out in front, and sometimes we're like, all right, just kind of scoot this way, or, just trying to help coach them up some.
Now, when a client comes to you and, there is, wetlands on their property and they have to do due diligence, whether it's to find contamination or the listed species or, whatever it may be. As far as contamination now, I know that we've had some engineers come in talking to us about how to remediate, I don't know, phosphate. I'd heard about a property recently that had arsenic on it. So what happens then?
So arsenic is a good example, actually. It's a naturally occurring substance that's in the ground, and actually there are a lot of places in Miami-Dade County that the naturally occurring arsenic levels in the soil are above the targeted cleanup level.
Okay.
So it's all contaminated. If you go straight by the numbers, right, it's all contaminated. We had a scientist from the University of Florida, and I think with IFAS, went to the middle of the Everglades, never been developed, completely untouched, tested the soil, and it was above the standard target cleanup level for arsenic.
Okay.
So then you're looking at me like, so what happens? And so,
no, I'm really thinking now there's just one more thing for me to think about at night. So.
There's not. Don't worry about this.
Okay.
Right? Just tell you don't worry about this. Two reasons why. One, so there are other countries, Western countries, European countries that are very well advanced and very well much first world countries that have their target cleanup level for arsenic is like 6 times higher than the United States.
Okay.
And so Americans, and I love being American, it's not a knock against us, but it's, do you want fries with that? And we go, yeah. You want to supersize that? Yeah, I want to supersize that. Why? Because more is better. right? More is always better.
More is always
and so
better.
in the converse, when you're saying, well, how should we clean this up? Well, you should get it down to a 0. Like, well, settle down there.
Okay.
0 is not attainable, you
Yeah.
know. And so sometimes, and not always, right? And sometimes the politics gets involved, and not the big politics, but the public perception politics gets involved with causing numbers to be perhaps a little more stringent than they maybe should. And I'm not saying that across the board, but there are some areas that if you really applied the same science to all of these different numbers, and
Okay.
what I'm talking about is the contaminant levels in soil, contaminant levels in water, if you applied an even scientific method across, they would go, you should raise this one and make it less stringent. You should lower this one and make it more stringent.
Okay.
But we're not making something less stringent, right? Because the
Right.
public will go, wait a minute, you're making it more dangerous for us. And
Right.
so back to your question. So there are times, like with arsenic, that let's say you've got a recycling facility somewhere that had been there, or a cattle dip vat on a farm.
I just learned about
Yeah,
this.
yeah. So you have a cattle dip vat. So back when we were we eradicated the botsy fly, I think, and it was a invasive species. It's really gross. It really
my
is gross. It lays its eggs in the host animal,
I'm gonna.
And-
I wish I could plug my ears, but I haven't.
and then eats them from the inside.
Oh,
So
my
it's
Lord.
bad. It's
Okay.
really bad. And so the cattle herd was threatened with that 100 years ago or so.
Yeah.
And the Floridians built state fences across the state in different places, and every herd had to they pushed them and made them swim through a vat of arsenic.
Okay.
And so they would swim them
Okay.
through. And it got rid of everything on them. It wiped it out. Didn't kill the cow, right? Because that's what a dewormer is that you use for a pet or a dog or a cow or a horse or anything. You give just enough poison to kill the pest, but not enough to kill the host. It's the same kind of thing going on, but it was liberally applied. Well,
I'm like,
farmers were forced to do it. Okay, they were forced to do it, and it was a good idea to do it, or we'd have lost the whole herd,
Sure.
the whole state herd. So it was good call. But when that was all done, they just covered them up. So we got these arsenic vats all over the place.
okay.
And so then you're like, well, that doesn't sound good, because everybody knows the play arsenic and old lace.
Yeah.
You know, we learned that when I think at Kathleen Elementary School when I was growing up, even. And so we know arsenic is a poison. But so why does that matter? And so what we do typically, so you're going to buy a property, and all of these places have pretty much been identified where they occur, sorta, and suspected arsenic vat. You find a cattle dip vat, it existed on this property, and then we work with the consultant, and we'll go, how much arsenic is down there?
Okay.
Okay, is it above what we would call a naturally occurring level?
Okay.
Is it below a naturally occurring level? Is it above the target cleanup levels or below? And so that's when you go to your phase one. Your phase one should find those things. And all the phase one will tell you is, we think you got a problem. You might
Yeah.
have a problem. And then a phase two then would go in and go, yeah, you have a problem. And this is kind of how big it is. This is
Okay.
kind of get our arms around a little bit. And then you go into whether you need to clean up. And sometimes leaving it in place and having the nature take its course is the answer. Just leave it in place. So like around the Tampa International Airport, all those nice restaurants there on that row, those were all part of a landfill years and years ago. They had all kinds of contamination. But it's right there next to the bay. They cleaned most of that stuff up, but there's all kinds of contamination under the restaurants and under the parking lots. But it's not so high as to pose an imminent threat to danger for
Okay.
everybody, and nobody in the area is on a drinking water well that would get contaminated. So you leave that in place. But all of those things are covered by very strict regulations with the Department of Environmental Protection to figure out when we have to clean it up to make sure nobody gets sick, or when we can leave it in place and put institutional controls in place, like it has to be capped, there can't be any wells in the area, and there's deed restrictions on the property, and perhaps monitoring wells and stuff like that, which is more than a little bit more than institutional controls to make sure that it's not escaping and going someplace crazy. So,
Okay.
But there's a very rigorous schedule. I do a little bit of that. We have other folks in our firm that do a lot of that stuff.
I can imagine.
And really understand it really well.
Yeah, I can imagine, especially, throughout Florida, and just, like you said, there could be a waste facility there or whatever it is, a holding, not necessarily a facility, but there's a lot of that stuff across Florida, and I think people would be stunned.
Yeah, well, across the country too. So
Yeah.
every town in the state, you would have every town before we had landfills as we know them today.
Yeah.
And garbage trucks as we know them today. People would take care of their own garbage.
Right.
And they would do that at the edge of town. Well, when the town grows, now it's not at the edge of town.
Yeah.
And so you actually had a creeping landfill almost
Oh my
that folks
goodness.
would kind of clean it
Yeah.
up, or they would bury it,
Yeah.
and those kinds of things. And I'm talking 100 years ago.
Yeah.
75 years ago. And so you have these residual pockets of potential problems. It hasn't wiped us out,
Yeah.
right? I mean, we're
Not
still,
yet.
we're still kicking. So, it hasn't wiped us out, but those are the kinds of things. And I always used to tell folks when I was at DEP, look, a lot of the stuff we do is very, very unsexy, right? Who wants to make?
I was not expecting that word.
Yeah. But I think it fits. I think
It
it
does
fits.
fit. It does fit.
So what do you ask a guy or a lady or a guy or whoever, and you go, what do you do? Well, I make sure that we clean up cattle dip vats,
Yeah.
And they're like, okay, all right, that's fine, and so, but it's extremely important
Yeah.
that we, so thankfully we have people paying attention to that.
Yeah.
And I know it just drives my clients crazy. It drives me crazy sometimes.
Yeah.
So I'm like, just stop it.
Yeah.
But they're paying attention to the small things. And that's not a bad, that's good for all of us.
And
really.
so you will go, are there hearings on this? Do you go before these governmental agencies, or is it just emails? Like, what is it?
So that's a good question. That's a very good question. So if we've got a project, let's say we're asking for a permit
Okay.
to build a high-rise development right near the beach, and we ask for a permit, and the agency says no. Now, I will tell you candidly, our job is in great part about getting to a yes, of figuring out how to get you to yes. And sometimes we'll withdraw a permit, regroup, relook at what our goals can be achievable, and then take another run at it. So I was talking with some folks, I was speaking a month or so ago, and they said, well, how many get denied? I said, well, not a lot. But don't let that fool you. It's not that the state agencies aren't taking blood and flesh from us.
Oh my
okay?
gosh.
We're changing plans and we're doing different
Right,
things
right.
to meet the regulations as they exist. And so if you set up a set of rules, I go home, and I tell my kid, look, if your job is to feed the dog and to walk the dog, all right? And if you feed the dog and you walk the dog, then I'll give you this iPhone. And they feed the dog and they walk the dog for the requisite period of time, and then they get the iPhone. How can I complain that I gave them an iPhone? They followed the rules that I set up. And so that's how we work. And so typically most of these decisions are made through meetings and negotiations with the entities to
Okay.
come up with the right mix of controls or other things. You say, you can build this high rise, but you can't have this kind of lighting.
Okay.
Because the turtles get confused and they walk towards the land and they get run over in the street, and it's terrible for everybody, I guess. I don't know. But that's a real thing. So and so we'll have that negotiation, or you can have this number of slits in a marina, but you can't have this number.
Okay.
Because it'll kill too many manatees.
Okay.
So that's the theory. And so we'll work through those things. But it does sometimes go to a administrative hearing is what we'd call it.
Yes.
So typically that looks like we get a permit, we successfully get a permit, and then somebody doesn't like it. And then they challenge it. And then that'll end up going to the Division of Administrative Hearings.
Okay.
And we'd get an administrative law judge, and then we fight it out,
Yeah.
So.
Oh dear. I've never met an administrative law judge before. I've met several judges, but never, I feel like maybe they're like far and few between. I don't know.
So there's a cadre of them
Yeah.
based out of Tallahassee.
Oh.
And they're good folks.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
All
Yeah.
judges are good folks, right?
Well, they're just people.
They are.
Yeah, I mean, seriously. I mean, not even being facetious.
No, my grandfather was a judge. I know.
Well, there you go. They're just people. I mean, they go to work and they try to do the best
Yeah.
they can and do what they're supposed to do. And I agree with them sometimes, and I disagree with them sometimes, and that's okay.
Yeah, you just better hope their coffee was made right that morning. So,
Well,
you know,
you
me too, though.
Don't want them to be grumpy.
No.
So.
Okay, so now I do want to kind of switch topics here.
Okay.
Because I really did want to touch on this. I think it's important to a lot of our clients here. It's the Right to Farm
Yeah.
Act.
It's a good topic, timely, and it's multifaceted. I mean,
Okay.
it is a very pervasive topic
Okay.
that's changing all the time, quite frankly. The legislature's always working on that one. So the Right to Farm Act is actually located in the criminal code, and it's
Oh.
that agriculture cannot constitute a nuisance. That's what it really is. Okay. Now, that's not the whole story, right? But that's what it really is. So, and I remember as a child, one of the reasons I became a lawyer, quite honestly, maybe the seminal reason I became a lawyer, is I was a child, 11 years old maybe, and there was a big tract of land, 80 acres behind us, that the owners were going to develop, and they did develop, and they went through the land use and the zoning changes and all of those things as they existed at the time. And it fascinated me how much that impacted us and how much power the government had over people's lives directly, and that the only people that really understood what the heck was going on were all the lawyers, right? And so that really piqued my interest a great deal. That was
Okay.
like my first intro, and I wanted to be a lawyer ever since.
Okay.
That's all I ever wanted to do.
Wow.
Yeah, never had there's no plan B, ever.
Okay.
That's what I was doing. And I think I'm going to write it out now.
Yeah.
You know,
I mean,
28 years later practicing, I think I'm just going to ride this one out.
Yeah.
And so we actually bought, we got a sign to put up on the edge of our little farm there in North Lakeland that had that statute on it. And it basically said farms have odors and noises and all kinds of stuff that could be considered obnoxious, but we were here first, and it's not going to be a nuisance, period.
Okay.
That's kind of the genesis of the Right to Farm Act.
Okay.
The Right to Farm Act is now spread, I shouldn't say spread, it's actually developed in a number of different ways
Okay.
to help protect farmers do what farmers do. One of the things that is in place now that ties directly in what we were talking about is the state has put together basin management action plans, BMAPs. And the government loves acronyms.
I know.
Loves them. So the basin management action plans were set up by the Department of Environmental Protection for different watershed basins, so different areas. So if you're in a spring shed, this is a good example. Go over to Crystal Springs, although it's now closed. It used to be open to the public, actually. It was pretty cool. The Thomas family is a wonderful family, but it just got to be too much, I believe. Anyway, so that spring, they would draw basically hydrologic lines around it. Everything that affects and goes into that spring shed, we need to protect. And this is how we're going to protect it. The reason that matters for the Right to Farm Act discussion is because there's best management practices, not to be confused with BMPs, not to be confused with BMAPs, right? So the best management practices are best management tools that are developed by developed by the Florida Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services. So the Florida Department of Ag develops these BMPs with the assistance of a whole bunch of folks, but also including the University of Florida, IFAS, and they do, I can candidly tell you, they do a tremendous job helping the state face all of these challenges. And so they can be as much as, as much as, so if you have an equestrian operation, how do you separate the manure? You clean out the stalls, and where do you put it? Does that mix in with the stormwater and goes downstream, or do you segregate it so it doesn't mix with the stormwater? And those kinds of things. If you have a nursery operation, it's like an app, right? So remember the old Apple ads? We got an app for that.
Yes.
They got a BMP for that,
Okay.
right? So not exactly, but pretty close.
Yeah.
So they have them for row crops like watermelons and squash and stuff like that. Strawberries, they have them for row crops. And how you control the water, nutrients runoff, and those kinds of things. The application of pesticides and fertilizer. The two big boogeymen for the bee maps, Basin Management Action Plans. And you hear about the blue-green algae blooms and the
Yes.
Lake Okeechobee and everything going on in Indian River. The two big boogeymen are nitrogen
Okay.
and phosphate.
Yes.
So you cause too much to grow and it dies off. It sucks all the oxygen out. Everything starts to die.
Yes.
You create enough that algae clouds everything up and everything on the bottom dies. That's the whole thing. But the two big boogeymen in the water world are really nitrogen and phosphorus. And so they're targeted primarily with kind of that in mind,
Okay.
of controlling those nutrients. How much irrigation are you putting out? Water use is included as well. Does it create too much runoff? Is the plants doing enough uptake of the fertilizers you put on? Are you putting on too much fertilizer? You put on too little fertilizer? Are you putting it in the right place? And so that program if you implement BMPs, then you are presumed to have complying with
Okay.
water quality requirements. And that's kind of the trade-off, is carrot and stick. Those are becoming more and more mandatory. So if you're in a spring shed, they're mandatory now.
Okay.
And I think we'll see it where it will be mandatory in the future. And so it's a constant struggle to keep the technology and the
Yeah.
science up.
I don't know how, these farmers, I feel like that would be very difficult if the rules keep, kind of narrowing in on each area. So do you represent, farmers or these ranchers or, whatever you want to call them, if they've not met these requirements, or, if something's found to be wrong and the rules weren't followed?
Well, so that hasn't really become a humongous issue thus far that I am seeing.
Okay.
Typically, so we'll have a client and they go, "Hey, I want to build a barn." All right, that's good. Is your property green belted? Is it classified as agriculture by the property appraiser? They go, "Well, yeah, it's classified." And then you're good. Build it.
Oh,
You're good.
Okay.
If it's going to be part of the farm, build it. It's a non-residential ag farm building, which is another Right to Farm Act kind of thing that's squirreled away in a different place.
okay.
And then there's agritourism that's squirreled away in a different place. So all these the Right to Farm Act's over here, but everything else is scattered in amongst all
Yeah.
these other things. But primarily for purposes of an ag operation, we typically, first thing we do is go, "Are you enrolled in the best management practices?" And they go, "What's that?" I'm like, "Well, here's what this is." And the Department of Agriculture is not really set up to be a regulatory agency on the ag side. They do a lot of regulatory stuff on the consumer services side.
Okay.
But they are really set up to be a yes agency.
Okay.
And that's not a dig at them at all. What it really boils down to is they want to get you enrolled in the best management program across the state. And they want to get, all of ag enrolled in that so that we can do a better job, reduce the amount of fertilizer we're using, reduce the amount of pesticides we're using, and kind of, pull things forward, I guess. Not push, but really kind of pull things
Yeah.
forward. It actually reminds me a lot. Were you involved in 4-H clubs growing up?
Don't tell anyone, but I was in FFA.
Well, that's fine.
Yeah.
That's fine. I was as well. I was a star green hand my senior year of high school at Lake Gibson High School, many, many, many years ago. But I was involved in the 4-H clubs, and the 4-H clubs were actually originally put together around the turn of the last century in order to help farmers become acquainted with modern farming practices.
Okay.
So they would take these, it started out as young boys, and they would call them corn clubs in the Midwest. And they would go, "Hey, boys, here's the new way to do this." And they would take that home, and everybody was working on the farm anyway. And those practices started catching on because they were better. And it was because of the science. And that's how they were able to implement the new science in those things. And so that's a lot of the best management practices have led to a lot of cost share programs, which are very, very important. And what I mean by that is, so if you've seen, we don't have a lot of them here in Central Florida, but up in the northern part of the state, we have a lot of center pivots. Right, I'm sorry. Big sprinklers. We got a lot of big sprinklers. You know, the kind that goes around the whole field, makes a big circle.
Yes.
All right, so
yes.
It pivots around the center.
That's right. Center.
Thank
right,
you,
right.
Chad. Thank you, Chad. Thank you.
I'm my fault. They have technology now on those things that you'll sometimes see these drop hang downs for the sprayers.
Yeah.
And they have soil sensors in the ground, and they communicate with everything, and it says spray water here, but as we're going around now, turn that off for a little bit because that's wet enough. You don't need more there.
Incredible, yeah.
Put it back on, and that can help reduce the amount of disease.
Okay.
Mold and
Yeah,
those kinds
yeah.
of fungus and stuff like that. So we get just enough on, but not too much.
That's
water.
incredible.
Reduces runoff and a whole bunch of other things. And then the precision ag farming practices is really what that's all about. The fact that down in Waimama, not too far from here, down South Hillsborough County, I was over there in December, and they were showing us this AI tool and artificial intelligence on the back of the tractor. And it had spray nozzles going down, I think it was strawberries, or tomatoes one, I don't remember. It was that small row crop. And as it was going over, the AI was looking, and when it found what it wanted to spray, it sprayed. And when it didn't find what it wanted to spray, it didn't spray. And so you can take a pesticide or herbicide and go down a row, and rather than just coating the whole row with pesticide, you only put it in the areas that you need to put it. And
Incredible.
so you reduce that amount of stuff. And so those are the kinds of things that are actually burgeoning. And so as far as a legal practice, it hits the cool button all over the place.
Yeah.
It just pounds the cool button in my mind. For legal applications, we go, are you enrolled in BMPs? No, you need to get enrolled in BMPs because there's a lot of positive things that can come out of it, because later on when they come looking for you for, let's say, contaminating in spring or something like that, you say, whoa, we're doing our part on this, so settle down.
Yeah.
And it helps us help them later on down the road.
That's incredible.
It's a lot of cool stuff. And then putting that crap in,
Yeah.
putting that stuff in, right? Doing all that stuff, which I barely understand, by the way. Doing all that stuff, whether that's going to require a permit. And typically it doesn't.
Okay.
But sometimes you can be surprised at what folks want to put you through. So,
Well, this has been
Enlightening.
very enlightening. I am really glad that we had you on here, because I heard some stuff that I've heard in the past, but to kind of put it all together and be able to know that there are people out there that do this for a living, and it's not so scary.
No, and it's really not.
Yeah.
But I would also tell you, so like a topic we didn't cover, like sovereign submerged lands.
Yes.
Which is we don't have time, I don't think, to deal with that.
I mean, go.
No, we don't. Chad, I'm telling you, that's an hour discussion, just an hour, to give you the intro.
Yeah.
Right? So it really does start with when the Spanish, controlled the state of Florida as a Spanish territory, colony. That's where that story starts. So we don't have time
Deep
for that.
dive.
We just don't have time for it. But
Part 2.
Right, that's right. But I will tell you candidly on that topic, which is incredibly difficult to deal with.
Okay.
I mean, because we're talking about what existed at the time of statehood,
Okay.
1845. That was.
That's the That's the base. That's the
is
standard.
What was there?
Really?
Yeah. And so that's it. I know some about it.
Yeah.
There's probably 5 or 6 other lawyers in our firm that are very familiar with it
Okay.
as well. And that's what we do. And so in all of these areas, it's not, that's what I love so much about Lewis, Longman and Walker, truly love about it, is I'm not the Lone Ranger.
Yeah.
If you've got a wetland issue, I'm not just going to think of it myself and go, this is what I think we should do. I've got colleagues that have got decades of experience with this same stuff, different experiential standards and things that we've done through the years, and So we've run into this situation before, most likely.
Yeah.
And so that's what I love so much about this firm is we really are about a mile wide and about a mile deep on the things we do. We don't do divorces. We don't do personal injury. We don't do general business law. We do a little bit of real estate. We do a lot of land use, typically when it's too hot, but also in some areas as well. But we really do a lot of environmental stuff. That's what we do.
Yeah.
And I find that very comforting because
I do too.
I don't have to worry about.
Yeah. Well, it seems very specialized, truly. And I think that that's a wonderful thing because, you know, I know that we don't always say the whole saying, but it's like a jack of all trades makes you a master of none. And usually our property manager is like, yeah, but you're not saying the rest of it. But I really do like that one, you know, part of that phrase is truly like, you know, you guys, I think, are very honed into these specific areas and problems that these property owners and developers can come into. And I mean,
quite frankly, I see my role as more, I kid with folks all the time. I'm not really sure I'm a lawyer, you know? but I just kind of fix stuff.
Yeah.
You know, you've bumped up against something.
Yeah.
Or you've got something going. Let me see if I can fix that.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what we do. That's what I do. That's what I've done I've loved being a lawyer my whole career because I've always gotten the craziest cases and the craziest stuff go on. Just the wackiest stuff you can imagine.
Have you ever seen any physical altercations?
Physical?
During your
fights?
time? Yeah.
I've always been involved with a couple, not as a combatant. When you said I thought you said physical alterations, and in this day and age, I'm like,
happens.
I didn't know we were going there, but
I don't make enough money here to do that yet. So
I remember one time I was in a meeting, and it was a stormwater issue, truly a stormwater issue, and the engineer I'm working with comes up over the table.
No.
At the engineer from the county, and I'm standing up and putting my hand on both of them to keep them from. They're throwing punch. They're getting ready to go at it. We worked that out, but it was. And they all had a temper, you know. So yeah, I haven't. I've stopped some fights.
Those are I've had, you know, I had a deposition where there was somebody threw a chair, and it was my favorite deposition of all time because it was very lively.
Yeah.
But people get very heated.
Yeah, it gets
very heated.
Well, so I started my career as a prosecutor, so I saw all kinds of wacky stuff.
Yep.
Yeah. Those were real. Those were real. I mean, I always told folks, I said, so what do you do when two guys get into a knife fight? I said, we prosecute the winner.
Oh my
I mean, that's kind of what happens. I mean, but I'm so glad I don't do that kind of work because that's a huge emotional thing.
Oh, it'll wear you down. It'll burn you out.
My friends that are still prosecutors, I tip of the hat. I love them all.
Yeah.
God bless them. I'm glad we got you. You know, just love them to death.
They're doing the Lord's work out there.
That's a hard job.
It's very hard.
And being a public defender is probably harder. And we need those people.
I know. We
need
really
them too. I'm very central. I'm very down the middle. Yeah.
I love that. Well, how can people get in touch with you?
So, you know, I guess probably the best way is to look us up online. Lewis, Longman Walker. Put it in. You'll find us. You know, I have to look at a card. I don't think I have one handy to remember my phone number.
We will link it in the episode.
My cell phone number is area code 727-641-7652.
Okay.
But look us up, and we've got an office all over the place.
Yes, and you cover the whole state of Florida.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much for coming on. I think very enlightening. I learned a lot. I hope everybody else did too. Chad?
Yeah, I had my mind blown a little bit and learned some stuff. So.
I hope it wasn't too boring.
No, sir, no. It was,
What did I learn? The center pivot?
Yeah.
That's it.
That's solid. But what's the BMAP?
Best
management practice is where you're going with that?
area practices? Application practices?
We'll review it.
Okay.
That's on the
After
test
show.
next time. It's a basin management action plan.
There it is, action plan.
Thanks for coming in.
Thanks, Angus. Thank you.